This work is titled The Historical Identity of the Queen of Sheba and Moses. By myself, Nicaule Campbell. Briefly, I'm from Auburn, New York, currently reside, also born in Auburn, New York, grew up in southern Q County, moved north in the 90s. I went to school for fine arts locally. I'm a portrait painter and a writer. My aim of this work, that I have been working on since I was 20 years old, is to prove by means of context clues in ancient texts the positive identity of the Queen of Sheba and Moses, based on personal insight and my own research. Texts cited include Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, page 259, from 70 CE, American Standard Bible, Christian Standard Bible, Song of Solomon 2:14, Matt 22:42, Luke 11:31, Isra'iliyyat literature touched on by Nicholas Clapp, Sheba through the desert in search of the legendary queen, Islamic sources, the Kebra Negast, the Glory of Kings, Ethiopia, 14th century, the biblical story Sheba son of Bichri, 2 Samuel 20, comparing with Ethiopian Islamic tales of the same context. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions from Deir el-Bahri Punt trip, 1400 BC, being part of the physical evidence of the identity of the Queen of Sheba. I first started researching this topic in 2004 after having read the Bible and passages again and again. My primary motivating force came from lack of information. It was noticeable in some stories that I found, seemed cut off. Stories seemed embellished, too much information on certain characters, while concurrent characters like the Queen of Sheba had no real verifiable name and origin. That would be an example of omission, not just something that was long since forgotten, but a purposeful omission. I came to the conclusion that what I was reading was a corrupted text, for whatever reason, my best guess being to legitimize the reigns of 2 Israelite kings with no verifiable proof in history. This does not seek to disprove musicians David and Solomon, but rather examine it from a different perspective. Obviously, we know earlier origins in different cultures of some of the scriptures, and here is more. The Queen of Sheba had no place of origin, no name, and no history. The current state of the world mystery is that she originated in Yemen or Ethiopia. David and Solomon still have no real archaeological evidence to support their reigns. The Tel Dan Stele, which is the only extra-biblical evidence of David, is dated about 200 years after his reign. That gave us 3,000 years to find it if it existed, which doesn't mean that it does not. This equals something that is completely questionable in archaeology. The whole situation was just not right, and I couldn't find enough information in Ethiopia either. Beautiful stories with mythic elements, but it just wasn't enough. With no idea where exactly to look, I went to a local antique store in my hometown at the time of Weedsport. It was really quite a thing. I literally looked at the shelves of books, found the oldest looking one. It said Josephus. I opened it up, and there it was on the page in front of me. Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, 1905 edition, page 259. Nicaule or Nitocris. That's Nicaule or Nitocris, Nitocris. Josephus, chapter 6. Solomon fortifies the city of Jerusalem, builds great cities, and entertains the queen of Ethiopia, 992 BC. Page 259. There was then a woman, queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. She was inquisitive into philosophy, and one that was on other accounts also to be admired. There was a queen reigned, he calls her by her name Nicaule, as thereby declaring that while the kings were of the male line and so admitted of the same name, while a woman did not admit the same, he did therefore set down that her name, which she could not naturally have, which was Pharaoh, which is what they assumed at the time. It was after this time when the forenamed Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia came to Solomon. A footnote at the bottom of the page states, the Queen of Sheba was the Queen of Sabia in southern Arabia and not of Egypt and Ethiopia. That the commentator, without any other point of reference, asserts Josephus must be mistaken, despite his access to books no longer available to this public. It took me 2 more years to find any information, being rerouted around Egypt as her origin because it just could not be. Matt 22:42, Luke 11:31. Our Savior calls this queen the Queen of the South. She came from the utmost parts of the earth. The commentator agreed it was more likely Arabia than Egypt or Ethiopia. In the meantime, I found Nicholas Clapp's book Sheba through the desert in search of the legendary queen. I was very impressed with the citing of the Isra'iliyyat literature written by Wahb ibn Munabi, etc., albeit it was not terribly clear. It was a beautifully written story, same with the Ethiopian. The Kebra Negast of Ethiopia tells the journey of Makeda, Makeda, Virgin Queen of Sheba, to the holy city of Jerusalem. Solomon prophetically dreams of a brilliant sun, and it came down from heaven and shed exceedingly great splendor over Israel. And when it had tarried there for a time, it suddenly withdrew itself and flew away to the country of Ethiopia, and it shone there with exceedingly great brightness forever, for it desired to dwell there. And the king said, I waited to see if it would come back to Israel, but it did not return. When Solomon the king saw his vision in his sleep, his soul became disturbed. But his understanding was snatched away by a flash of lightning, and he woke up with an agitated mind. Moreover, Solomon marveled concerning the queen, for she is vigorous in strength and beautiful of form. In what appears to be a rape scene made nice, she removes herself back to Ethiopia. On her return journey to Ethiopia, Makeda gives birth to a son at a spring in Mybella, present-day Eritrea. She named him Menelik, the son of a king. Menelik grew up in Aksum. He was as handsome as his mother was beautiful, and at the age of 22 he went off to Jerusalem to meet his father. He had the temerity to make off with the Ark of the Covenant. It was taken by them forthwith in the twinkling of an eye, the angel of the Lord being present and directing. The taking of the ark will come into play later. Prior to her purported trip to Solomon, of the history of Aksum, it says long ago, the city cringed in terror of a serpent king. His eyes resembled a fiery flame and his eyebrows black as a raven. His whole body was like lead and iron, and they bring him food every day. 10 cows, 10 bulls, 1,000 goats, 1,000 sheep, 10,000 of 10,000s of birds. The day came, it is told, when a courageous and beautiful young woman named Makeda approached Wanaba, calmly took his measure and cut off his head. Joyous and grateful, Aksum's population proclaimed Makeda their queen of Sheba. From Islamic sources, Nicholas Clapp's Sheba is a very similar story to Ethiopia, with much more detail in his book. Her name is Bilquis, paraphrased and shortened with main points. The Queen of Sheba and her visit to Solomon, king of the world, in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. The annals of former generations are lessons to the living. Let us be purged of folly. Let us seek wisdom. The story starts out with an ignorant king, ignoring public waterworks. He did not care for his people. A major dam collapsed and its waters flooded Kitor. When the waters subsided, the city's bereft people promised one another that they would better themselves. When they rebuilt the dam, directed in their labors by a vizier named Al-Himyari, a love story between Bilquis' parents, Al-Himyari and Umayya, takes place in the desert outside Kitor. Bilquis is born. Her father returns to the city of Kitor, and she was raised in the desert wilderness. She approached the age of 20, and she followed an incense caravan to the city of Kitor and found her father. He was very proud of her, and his hunting companions were wide-eyed, for she was both beautiful and intelligent. She excelled in riddles. The vizier was naturally happy to have his daughter by his side, but he warned her they had a tyrannical king who ravished virgins out of wrath, at least one a week, then quickly tired of them and threw them from his palace, objects of scorn and shame. Bilquis often went out, leaving the protection of the household, and appeared willing or even anxious to catch the eye of the wicked king. It was only a matter of time until he glimpsed her in a span of seconds, went mad with desire. He summoned her to his palace, up staircase after staircase until they reached the tower overlooking Kitor. There was food and wine, and she made sure that his cup was filled and refilled. She plays the submissive woman, and at the height of his ecstasy of what was to come, he closed his eyes and she reached for his dagger, pulled it from its sheath, and without the least bit of hesitation ran it straight through his heart. His soul at once was dragged down to the ovens of hell. Led by Bilquis' father, the king's viziers clattered up the stairs to the king's mafraj. Bilquis was at the door and offered him wine to cloud their minds. Then calmly told them, "The king says for you to send him your wives and daughters so that he may debase and deflower every one of them, every last one." They became furious and cried, "Is he not satisfied with what he has already had?" She coldly responded, "As you will, I shall go to him and acquaint him with your wrath." And she left them alone, that they might become even angrier. Upon her return, she said, "I've told him what you said, and he says he must have it so." The viziers gave vent to their rage, whereupon Bilquis offered, "Would you like me to kill him and rid you of this evil, in which case I would reign over you?" They discussed the matter and agreed. She told them to leave her alone with the king. Trembling, they retreated down the stairs. She took a big knife from the palace kitchen, ascended the tower, and cut off the head of the dead Sharik ibn Sherahil and hurled it out the window across Kitor's main square. The crowd gathering below was stunned, but not for long. Soon there was murmurs of Bilquis, Bilquis, none but you. She appeared at the palace gate and stamped it with her bloody handprint. In the Bible, Sheba, son of Bichri, is an ancestor of Saul and a Benjaminite leader who revolted against King David. 2 Samuel 20. Joab approaches Abel Beth Maacah, a wise old woman in the besieged city, convinced Joab not to destroy the city, and instructed the people there to behead the criminal Sheba, and she throws his head over the wall to Joab. You can also compare and contrast Judith, whose dating is uncertain, historicity uncertain, but does contain compelling similarity reversed. Another moment of inspiration came when I was reading Josephus against Apion. He relates a story told by Manetho, an Egyptian historian from 300 BCE, that the Israelites were driven from the land of Egypt for being lepers. Josephus, who was so full of emotion, states that this is in no way the truth of the matter. It's affirmed that in 1700 BCE, a group of Semitic people had taken over Lower Egypt. They dressed in the traditional garb of Egypt, but were not native to Egypt. They lived in mostly peaceful circumstances with the native Egyptians, but not always. We know this because of complaints from the ruling 17th dynasty native Egyptians in Upper Egypt. 300 to 400 years after the initial takeover of Lower Egypt by the Semitic peoples, as told by the Carnarvon tablet, the Asiatics had borders, tolls, and taxes, and the native Egyptians could not farm anywhere near the fertile soil. They could not pass by Memphis. And this is to be continued. I immediately looked up pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. I was years into this mystery. And there she was, Hatshepsut, Maatkare. Anyone familiar with her knows she was a strong female pharaoh. A temple is built, Deir al-Bahri, Luxor, Egypt. Inscribed inside the walls is her famous trip to Punt, where she traded in exotic goods and brought back ships of trees, textiles, incense, minerals, exotic animals to her own temple, not Solomon's, and this was in 1400 BC. She was a queen in what appeared to be peacetime. Arts flourished, and she was also known for her 4 obelisks, which were entirely covered in electrum. Her temple was called the Holy of Holies, the Splendor of Splendors. American Standard Bible, O my dove that art in the clefts of the rock, in the covert of the steep place, let me see thy countenance, let me hear thy voice, and thy countenance is comely. Christian Standard Bible, my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crevices of the cliff, let me see your face, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. Song of Solomon 2:14. Deir al-Bahri in Luxor, Egypt, her temple is situated in a corner of a steep rock cliff. We know from Josephus that Nicaule is a Phoenician Aramaic translation. I once read somewhere, and I can't remember where now, about Egyptian and Ethiopian words, and it has something to do with like the letters D and R becoming confused between the cultures, but even without it, one can see the similarity between the name Makeda, Makeda, Queen of Sheba's name in Ethiopia, and Makera, Makera, alternate spelling of Makara, Maatkare, in Egyptian. In 1400 BC, the accurate dating of the actual historical Queen of Sheba, Israel was not yet Israel. Ethiopia, Nubia, and Levant were all part of Egypt. The political activity of pre-Israel was governors subservient to Egypt, which is exactly why no evidence has been found for David and Solomon in 1000 BCE or 1400 BCE. I believe the stories were fluffed up and based and embellished on an original story that originated in Egypt, where they were based off of Maakare's family history in particular, and this is carved in stone. I have composed a matrilineal key to the reading of the scriptures, which compares the 18th dynasty and the line of Saul in the Bible. Amos I, who's the beginning of the 18th dynasty, is a historical match in many ways and explained later in part 2 to Moses. After him came Amenhotep, Thutmose I, Thutmose II, and Thutmose III. Thutmose III and Saul from the Bible, King Saul, are a historical match, prolific military careers, many similarities, and Saul's daughter in the Bible, Nicaule, Michal. The Queen of Sheba, Makera Hatshepsut, was a direct descendant of Moses, Amos I, and biblical King Saul, Thutmose III, was her father. History is full of awful examples of suppression. This one was used to legitimize a different king as though this queen barely existed. It's an early example of a censored work because this can't be an original that we are in possession of. Also, because of my discoveries, it's been apparent that hieroglyphs are being translated incorrectly, which is easy to do when pharaohs reign concurrent and with multiple pharaohs alive at once, and who all have the same names, like the Thutmoses. Also, repeating names, Hatshepsut was the name of Thutmose II's wife. Makera was the queen's first name, and Hatshepsut, I believe, was more like a formal middle name, named after a grandmother. But due to these issues, they confused the identity. Because of the earlier mention of Hatshepsut, this puts her closer to her great-grandfather, which I disagree with. Archaeology, although good, is not sufficient to solve all mysteries. Currently in archaeology, she is the aunt of Thutmose III. There's a power struggle, and it's very soap opera. This is an example of embellishment, and thanks to the Bible's unintentional clue, Michal, M-I-C-H-A-L, we make the connection between the name Nicaule and Michal. So we have overlap, concurrence, same names. I want to recognize that the art and sculpture of Hatshepsut is finer and smoother, like Thutmose III, but less like Thutmose I and II, which was 100 years before her. They had other things to focus on than sculpture at the time. That's why there wasn't an overwhelming amount of it from before Thutmose III. So to find her 100 years earlier in sculpture even would be an anomaly. Now that was really something, right? But I still needed more. So I expanded my focus to concurrent regions at the time in 1400 BCE, and prior to the origins of the name in 2000 BC. That is 3,500 years ago, 400 years before the agreed time of David and Solomon. Further proofs, Ugarit, 1400 BCE. Corresponding article found online December 18, 2015, What is the oldest known piece of music by Evan Andrews. Hurrian tablet number 6, The Hymn to Nicaule, Nikkal. Article titled Nicaule, the Mesopotamian Goddess Awakening Female Mysticism. Nicaule, Ugaritic, NKL, Nicaule Walib, is a goddess of Ugarit Canaan and later Phoenicia. She is a goddess of orchards, whose name means great lady and fruitful, and derived from Akkadian West Semitic Ilat Inbi, meaning goddess of fruit. This is from the article What's the Oldest Known Piece of Music. Many are wrong to think the oldest melody is the Sikelos epitaph from ancient Greece. That only dates back to 200-100 BCE. It's quite young in comparison. The oldest musical notes are the Hurrian melodies, which are almost 3,500 years old. The Hurrians are people who lived for thousands of years in the territory of Mesopotamia. Many city-states traded and fought each other. Ancient Greece did not exist at the time. Regular excavations of the king's castle of the Hurrian city-state of Ugarit near Ras Shamra Temple, modern-day Syria, were made during the 1950s. 36 tablets with cuneiform writing on them were discovered in the process, and the writing was different from regular writing. Most were damaged. The content of the tablets was first published by French archaeologist Emmanuel Laroche, who tried to explain them. Cuneiform had already been deciphered by then. The writing was music, texts of hymns, and explanations of how they should be performed. Also, the names of the authors, or the earliest known composers, were preserved on the tablets. Tablet number 6 was the most well-preserved, upon which is written the hymn of Nicaule, goddess of gardening. Hymns, text, and instruction for a 9-string lyre were all on the tablet, and on the other one were instructions on how to tune the instrument. Current to the date of publication, the tablets were being stored in the National Museum of Damascus. The entire preserved hymn of Nicaule served as a base for deciphering. All 36 hymns were written the same way. The text of every song is located on a long spiral and is written in the Hurrian language under the text, which is Akkadian. Are written instructions on how the song should be played and names of intervals and numbers denoting the notes. Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians originated from different areas of present-day Iraq. They dominated Mesopotamia from the beginning of written history, 3100 BCE, to the fall of Babylon in 539 BCE, when it was conquered by the Achaemenid Empire that fell to Alexander the Great in 332 BCE. I can't exactly explain it yet, but there's another theory forming here, and it has to do with different time periods, 2000 BCE, 1400 BCE, 539 BCE. The name Nicaule in Mesopotamia was a very long-lived name. Nicaule, or Nicaule, was worshipped at especially in the 3rd dynasty. The kings of III built her temple Ekherzita in 2000 BCE. It was already an old name. In the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, She was introduced to Syria via Haran, the ancient center of moon worship. The stories of their mythic pantheon are family histories, really, and hers in particular a love story. Her parents' name were Enki and Ninhursag. She was the maiden bride of the moon god and the mother of the sun god Utu, and she had either one or two daughters, Inanna and Eresh Kigal. Nicaule, the Sumerian and Akkadian goddess, is known as Nicaule in Phoenician and Aramaic. The moon god promises her that he will turn the steppe land of her love into an orchard and a vineyard. The language of the story is erotic. Canaanites believed that fertility and fruitfulness in heaven would also result in terrestrial abundance for human beings. The hymn to the goddess Nicaule in the Kotharat, the seven goddesses of childbirth, the oldest known song, words, and notation, is meant to be performed as part of the wedding ritual. Nicaule's symbol is a vessel of water with a fish in it, which signifies the womb. This is another clue that will come into play later. Nicaule is associated with dream divination, vision, and interpretation. It's believed that the world's first book of dreams, a collection of dream symbols and meanings, comes from Mesopotamia. Sumerians also observed their dreams as signs from God, and people had their dreams translated by priests, who then projected the dreamer's future. The Sumerian word nin, from the Akkadian pronunciation of the sign Eris, was used to denote a queen or a priestess and is often translated as lady, queen, mistress, proprietress, lord. Nicaule means great lady. Nicaule, lady of the great temple, Eresh Kigal. The compound form nin, dingir, divine lady or lady of God, from the Akkadian entu denotes a priestess. The Bronze Age China, the Shang Dynasty, Xi Wangmu, linked to Hatshepsut, 1400 BCE, etc. With excerpts from the Holy Mothers of Ancient China by Ricardo Fracasso, Sinologist. In China, Bronze Age civilization centered around the Yellow River during the Shang Dynasty, 1600 to 1046 BCE. Chariots, weapons, and vessels were fashioned in bronze using piece mold casting. The first mentions of the Queen Mother of the West date back to the oracle bone inscriptions of the Shang Dynasty, 1766 to 1122 BCE. Reading the cracks, made by the firing of tortoise shells, used in divining the future and answers to questions. She is referred to as the Western Mother. In quotations by Ricardo Fracasso, we hear first of the Queen as a timeless being who has attained the Tao. She is described as a hybrid, semi-human figure, possibly possessing power to control some of the constellations. Soon she is associated with Mount Kunlun, although she is sometimes said to reside within a cave. According to RF in his Part 2, is focused on the problem of the possible identification of Shi Wangmu of later times with the Shi Wangmu mentioned in the oracle bone inscriptions, a crucial view usually neglected or covered in few words, but worth further examination. Shi Wangmu 1 and 2. RF Part 1, Xi Wangmu, in pre- and early Han literature, Shi Wangmu and Xi Wangku as geographical names. In a number of pre-Han and pre-Han sources, the name Xi Wangmu is used to indicate a territory, like Sheba. Sun Tzu 19:5-6 Text 1. Basing himself on this and further evidence, B. Karlgren was able to conclude that all pre-Han sources give the tradition of Xi Wangmu as a faraway western state, and at the same time this state name serves as a designation for its ruler. Another passage in the Zinshu also refers to a visit paid by Emperor Yao, 2356 BC, to Xi Wangmu. Yao personally crossed the flowing sands, making a fief of Tushan. He saw Xi Wangmu, Text 3. Chapter 11, the Pao Ching Tang, Chapter 9, page 11, writes on the west he saw Xi Wangmu. Early Taoist traditions. M. Lu thinks the earliest reference to the Queen Mother of the West is probably to be found in the Chang Tzu, 476 BCE, 221 BCE, Warring States period, list of those who had obtained the Tao in former times. In the Chang Tzu, along with the Tao Te Ching, is one of the two foundational texts of Taoism. Xi Wangmu was allotted more words of text than her predecessors and successors. Xi Wangmu obtained it, the Tao, and took up her seat at Shaoquang. Nobody knows her beginning, nobody knows her end. 4th century BCE. The timelessness attributed to the Queen Mother is intimately related to the theme of immortality, more and more elaborated in later Taoist literature, but remains here a personal endowment of the goddess. On Xi Wangmu's immortality, see also the famous passage, Text 14 of the Ta Jian Fu of Suma Sangju, page 232, B. Watson, Records of the Grand Historian of China, Columbia University Press, 1961. The passage contains a reference to her top knot in different renderings of the word Shang. Bijou, jewel by Hervouet, hair ornament by Carlgren, burden of hairpins by Watson, high jade comb by Dubs. From online sources, on the Great Mountain Kunlun is a spirit with a human face and a tiger's body and tail. She lives in a cave on a mountain that contains 1,000 things. Remy 575. Shang means overcoming in height. Cahill 45. Kunlun means high and precarious, according to the Shizu Ji, because its base is narrow and its top is wide. Despo 28. It's also called the High Gate or Triple Mountain, which I believe is an allusion to the pyramids of Giza. In the Tang period, people said that the goddess lived in Hua, the western march mount of the west in Shangji, where an ancient temple of hers stood. Cahill 76. The character for a mortal, Jian, reads as mountain person, and alternately as dancing person, Shipper 2000. The goddess lives in a stone apartment within her sacred mountain grotto, from which spring the underground grotto heavens of medieval Taoism. It is a paradise of the dead. A tomb inscription near Chongqing calls it a stone chamber which prolongs life, Hu 83. The goddess was popular in political uprisings. She was seen as a protector in times of disorder. For example, the height of a popular movement in 3 BC, as described in the monograph of Strange Phenomena. It alarmed the gentry, and a Confucian historian preserved it in a negative light. Warned of the danger of rising yin, females in the peasantry stepping outside their place, they moved west opposite the direction of the great rivers, which is like revolting against the court. They moved west, spreading the word and message, the edict or tally. Around the same time, the Taiping Jing, scripture of great peace, described a world where all would be equal. Christopher Shipper observed, a similar hope drove the masses in search of the great mother goddess, 2000. Cultural shifts could not remove the goddess. Ancient art is rich in the iconography of Zhiwangmu, bronzes, murals, painted lacquers, clay tiles, and stone reliefs. Art conveyed a deeper meaning, for example, in a Taoist context, Buddha meditating under Zhiwangmu. Little 154-5 and Wu 89. In the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, Shang King Taoism became the official religion. She was considered its highest deity, and royals built private shrines for her. The Shang headdress disappears, and it is replaced by a 9-star crown. Poets named her Divine Mother. She governs the 9 noumena and is the guardian of the grindstone, the meeting point between heaven and earth. In 500, Tao Hongjing systemized Taoist deities into separate hierarchies, male and female, with Zhiwangmu as the highest goddess. She governs the Taoist arts of self-transformation, known as internal alchemy, including meditation, breath, and movement practices, medicines, and elixirs. She was also known as a shamanic goddess and a master of Taoist scriptures, with a library of the greatest books on Kunlun, Cahill 1415. In a text by Tu Kuang-ting, he includes narrative accounts of the Queen Mother's encounters with legendary Chinese heroes. In one such account, the Queen Mother plays the role of Lao Zi's superior and is credited with the authorship of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu 571 BCE. The dichotomy of the Queen Mother as the superior is a characteristic of Shang King Taoism, a goddess-worshipping sect of Taoism, of which Tu Kuang-ting was a master. Fang Shiming's 1919-2000, a study of the Queen Mother of the West legends, which adopted the traditional method of textual criticism in order to determine the location of the goddess's dwellings, as well as to investigate the relation between the goddess and the faith in the immortals, Shen Xian, which became prevalent during the Han Dynasty. In order to demonstrate this point, Fang Shiming used data consisting of inscriptions found in the Chang'an bronze mirrors and of travel descriptions in the Great Tang records on the western regions. This indeed was an important breakthrough because traditionally the use of a single document had sufficed to provide evidence. From An Exploration of the Queen Mother of the West, from the perspective of comparative mythology, Journal of Chinese Humanities 2017, Su Yongqian, excerpt from the Precious Scroll explaining the Great Vehicle, quoted by Ma Zixia Meng Hiying, 2011, Popular Religion and Shamanism, Brill, page 316, says, after preaching the wonderful message with an enlightened mind and manifested nature, they return home in complete pleasure. All children are redeemed and reunited, and they will resume a long life. They see the mother sitting on the lotus throne, surrounded by golden light. they are received and led to their original place. Xi Wangmu is said to have taught Yu the Great, founder of the Xia dynasty. It is believed she granted legitimacy and the right to rule, and techniques necessary for ruling. As usually assumed, the teacher automatically surpasses the pupil in seniority and wisdom. From the Prajnaparamita, chapter 53, the prediction of the Ganges goddess. And immediately after she had done so, through the Buddha's might, there stood out, high up on the firmament above the Lord's head, a pointed tower with 4 pillars, quadrangular, well-proportioned, enjoyable, pleasing to the mind. And that woman, having made this pointed tower common to all beings, dedicated it to their supreme enlightenment. This unfound yet is a reference to the 4 obelisks of Hatshepsut. Prajnaparamita means the perfection of wisdom, or transcendental knowledge, in Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism. It also refers to the female deity Prajnaparamita, also known as the Great Mother, Tibetan Yum Chenmo. According to Edward Kahns, the Prajnaparamita Sutras are a collection of 40 texts composed somewhere on the Indian subcontinent between 100 BCE and 600 AD. As you can see, besides extra positive identity of the Queen of Sheba in the Bronze Age Egypt, Ugarit, Mesopotamia, China, and India, in some cultures there seems to be 2 lines of history present. The original date dated to around 1450 BC, and a second line of history around 550 BCE or so, and also a 2000 BCE, which is the origins of Nicaule, origins of the name, and also Nitocris, but that will come later. This is something I have found in additional cultures as well, and was also noticed by Chinese scholars, who have mentioned the strange occurrences and the possible multiple visitations of the same person. Next, in part 2, is the identity of Moses, and what this has to do with ancient Irish history. I hope you'll join me for part 2 for the unraveling of this mystery.